Dr. Catherine Hajnal is our speaker today, and she was a tenured university business school professor with a doctorate in human factors engineering, outwardly successful, inwardly unhappy. Physical and emotional pain knocked so loudly she had to open the door, and so she quit academia without knowing what would come next. What she has since discovered is that she was meant to be a teacher. Ironically, she already was one. She just needed to be a different kind of teacher. And she had to discover some things about herself, first including a need to acknowledge her losses and her grief. Her curriculum is now life and all that that entails. She currently describes herself as a grief educator, speaker, and consultant. She facilitates an understanding of loss, supports the process of grieving for individuals and in organizations, and invites stepping into the transformative potential of grief. A couple months ago, I met with Catherine in my office to just kind of conduct a little bit of an interview with her for today's presentation, and found her to be very warm, very loving, very astute and aware. And we are so blessed to have her with us today. Please welcome Dr. Catherine Hajnal.
Good morning, everyone. Are we still morning? Yes, we are. We have a little bit of time in the morning. As I was preparing for speaking with you today, it afforded me the opportunity to think back to the last time that I spoke here at Unity. I've been coming to Unity on and off for a number of years, and I did have a chance to speak. In my mind, I thought, oh, it was 2 years ago, and I found out, well, maybe I actually do a decent job with paperwork, and I could go back into my records, and I realized it's been over 5 years. 5 years since I stood up here and was engaged with Unity in this way. And doing that, sort of acknowledging the 5 years, also created a lovely opportunity to step back and reflect and think about what had transpired in those 5 years. And first of all, there was some celebration, a sense of, oh, I have shifted. There has been some movement in my life as I've tried to do my work, to be in my practice. And there was also recognition of the fullness of the experiences that I have had in 5 years. Of the highs, of the lows, of the peaks, of the valleys, of the tears, and of the smiles and the laughter. And it's to that richness that I want to speak to today, to acknowledge all of what life has in store for us with each passing moment. And so I'm going to begin by dipping into one of our Unity principles, which is to see ourselves as spiritual beings. And I love that idea, spiritual being. I'm connected to something more than just me. I'm not alone. There's energy and there's something bigger than me, and I find comfort in that. And at the same time, there's a part of me that loves my humanness. I'm a human. I like being a human with all the quirks and quarks of what it means to be a human. So I'll often talk about myself as a spiritual being having a human experience. And I will freely add that quite often as I have thoughts about that in my mind, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. There's another little voice that sometimes that creeps in and says, but can we make sure it's human experiences that are fun and joyful and feel good? Those ones over here. And could I maybe not have to have so much of the painful ones? And part of us knows that it doesn't quite work that way, does it? That to be that spiritual being having the human experience, as we just heard, we're invited to resist nothing. that we get to play, if you will, with that full range. I think Rumi says it well when in his poem, The Guest House. Rumi is a Sufi poet. So I'm going to read The Guest House to you, and I invite you to think about what it's suggesting in terms of us thinking about the fullness of our lives. The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Entertain them all, invite them in, laugh as you do it. I don't know about you, but that feels like a tall order. To throw open, oh goody, let it all in. And so I will fully acknowledge the resistance. We talked about resistance. I feel resistance to that. Do I really want to let it all in? Do I really want to open that door and be with whatever shows up there? So I notice that resistance, the brakes, and at the same time, there's a part of me, and perhaps it's the spiritual part of me, that connects with a sense of, yes, I will go there. I need to go there. I want to go there. I am open and can work with whatever is at the door. I have felt that sense of resistance and go for it at another poignant time in my life. As you heard, I was a university academic at one point, and I was in a lot of pain. And as part of my journey, I quit academia, and I had spinal fusion surgery, which was life-changing for me. I had had many, many years of chronic pain. And I was trying to figure out, if not an academic, then what? Who am I? If I'm not that, then who am I? And I sensed there was something in this place of coaching, counseling, and I wanted to find out more about that. So here I was, roughly 12 weeks after my surgery. And I know that spinal fusion surgery takes about a year and a half to heal from, so I thought, well, I'll go back to school. And I will take some training, and I was at Rhodes Wellness College in my very first semester, and it was the counseling semester. And Rhodes' approach is everything that you will ask of a client, you have asked of yourself. In other words, stuff's going to get churned up in class, right? You're going to be opening the door. And so the door was opening for me, and I was finding many things there. And one day, my teacher said to me, Catherine, I think you have some grieving you need to do. Wow. Hell no! That resistance was right there. That grieving, why would I want to go there? That's that tough stuff, the icky stuff. I want this stuff. I just want to feel better. Thank you very much. Right? And so the resistance is there, the brakes were there. And at the same time, the tears started to flow. Some cork was released. Some kind of permission was given to me in that moment. I tapped into some deep knowing that I had some grieving I needed to do. And so rather than resisting that pain, I needed to turn towards it and actually invite exploration with it. So after that first I'm a crier, so not everybody is, and that's totally fine. I just acknowledge that I am. And so after that first, part of me was like, okay, good, I'm done. I got through that. And ultimately realized, no, I wasn't quite done. And then I moved in my humanness to a classic Catherine coping strategy, which I'm imagining will be familiar to some of you. One of my coping strategies when I have discomfort is I think, I know, I'll smart my way out of it, and then I don't have to feel anything. So I'll read a book, I'll take a workshop, I'll read lots of books, as a matter of fact, because then I won't have to feel it. I'll just get the answer. Well, we also know that that can be quite a helpful strategy. It doesn't hurt to learn things. And all that learning has given me additional perspective. And as a matter of fact, it's given me another career coming out of that. But ultimately, I came to realize that I needed to feel that stuff. And that I actually couldn't avoid it. The body talks loudly, doesn't it? I imagine many of us can connect with messages from our body. The pain, the literal pain, that invites us to turn towards rather than away from. And so in this turning towards this idea of that I have some grieving I need to do, I embarked on my study of grief and loss, and lo and behold, I discovered first and foremost that I knew a lot less than I thought I did. And as a matter of fact, most of what I knew or thought I knew about grief and loss was actually not true. I had a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of misconceptions about this thing called grief, about what constitutes a loss. Okay? And I'm going to share a few of those misconceptions with you today, and that's part of what I'll be working with in the workshop this afternoon. First and foremost was to discover that there are many, many losses. And that we will have losses on a daily basis. Right? I think we get lost by death. Right? That and grieving, there's a somewhat of an understanding around that. Right? When someone dies, we will feel that. We may feel a range of emotions around that, and we will feel that. And so at the time when my instructor said to me, Catherine, I think you have some grieving that you need to do, I was roughly a year past the death of my grandmother and the death of a good friend. And so one part of me was like, it's a year. I'm done. Isn't that how it works? I don't have any more grieving I need to do about those things. But I did. And turning to that idea of that there are many losses in life, I realized that there were many what are referred to in my field as non-death losses, or sometimes accompanying losses, or silent losses. And so I came to appreciate that all those years that I had been in chronic pain and had had to say no to invitation after invitation after invitation from family and friends to go out in the world, those were all losses. I came to recognize that the career that I thought I had wanted, being an academic, I had invested years of life and energy and action into becoming that, and then discovered it didn't fit. I needed to grieve the loss of that dream before I actually had the space to find a new one. Right? I had some grieving I needed to do. So the loss of health, whether temporary or permanent, is also a form of loss. Right? The sense of loss of a sense of security or predictability, states of being, these are also forms of loss. Right? Another piece that I discovered is that loss travels in packs. I wasn't always excited to find these things out, I'll be honest, back in my little resistance mode, right? And yet, stepping into this awareness invited some new possibilities for me. So when I say loss travels in packs, imagine when someone dies, if a spouse dies, yes, there is that precipitating event, and we acknowledge that as a loss. And then for the surviving spouse, they're dealing with many losses. A loss of intimacy, a loss of dreams and plans, potentially a loss of a sense of self. Who am I if I am not the spouse? A loss of a sense of confidence and contribution, discovering they now have to do all kinds of things they've never had to do before. And so underneath all of that is potentially a loss of a sense of how the world works. I had a plan. Things were supposed to work out a particular way. And now I don't know what all of this means. Okay? So for me, it was very illuminating to begin to look at these losses, these hurts in my life, and to begin to turn towards what were they inviting of me. And the other piece around loss, the other misconception that I had, was that loss only happens in the bad stuff over there. I came to appreciate that loss is present on a daily basis, the day that doesn't go according to plan. And loss actually is over here in what I was, thinking about is the good stuff, the stuff that I wanted. Right? I work with people in many different capacities. One of them is around career transition. And I have people who will be talking to me and they will say, Catherine, I've got a promotion. I should be excited. Why does a part of me feel sad? Right? Maybe in the context of that promotion, they're now losing some friends that they won't be able to connect with in the same way anymore. Maybe it includes a move to a new office. It includes some loss of routines and familiar, a sense of stability. And so it's not an either or, the reality is. It's both exciting to be in that promotion, and there are losses. There are some endings in that context. And so I began to realize in a way that I couldn't hide. They were going to be there in my daily life. It wasn't just about the big events, right? It was my everyday life that wasn't going according to plan. And putting all of these pieces together, and as I reflected on my losses and I began to acknowledge and work with them, I realized it offered great transformative potential for me. There was calling in all of that. The Tibetan Buddhists, they have a book called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And in that book, the Buddhists talk about a place called the Bardo. And the Bardo is an intermediate state. It's a gap. It's the place in between the death, in the language they use, the death and the rebirth. Or you can use it as a metaphor also for any ending, a space between an ending and a beginning. And I will invite you to consider that I believe there are no beginnings without endings. And if we're welcoming what's at the door, then we honor the endings as much as we honor the beginnings. Because it represents the fullness of what's present in our lives. As Rumi said, that place is a place where we might be cleared out for some new delight, for a guide from beyond. So what are we to do with all of this? So I'm inviting you to step into your losses, and I've indicated that I see this as connected with our spiritual practice. This is a few words from a woman, Lucy Kalanithi. And Lucy's husband was a doctor. Lucy herself is a doctor. And he was diagnosed with brain cancer and wrote a book about his last months of life, and he died before the book could be published, and Lucy went ahead and brought the book to life. And there's a lovely TED talk that she gives called "What Makes Life Worth Living in the Face of Death." And this is how Lucy talks about that richness. Engaging in the full range of experience, living and dying, love and loss, is what we get to do. Being human doesn't happen despite suffering. It happens within it. When we approach suffering together, when we choose not to hide from it, our lives don't diminish, they expand. Right? And if I think about my spiritual practice, it is about connecting with that sense of expansion, of possibilities. It supports us as we're trying to figure our way in life. It offers tools. We've talked about prayer. We've talked about meditation, mindfulness, any of our contemplative practices, our gratitude practice. All of those support us in making sense and finding meaning in our lives. And at its core, that's exactly what grieving is. Grieving is a process of sense-making, of making sense, of finding purpose in whatever shows up at the door. And so as we step into grieving, we are absolutely stepping in to our spiritual practice, and all of our tools can support us in the process of grieving. And I don't know about you, but that offers me some comfort. It's not about saying there won't be tough stuff. It's about saying we have things that we can turn to, our values, our beliefs, our practices, our principles. And they will support us as we figure out what's going on in the world. We may choose to evolve them on that voyage of discovery, and that's okay too. So when I was here at Unity in those 5 years ago, I didn't use the word grief educator. That came a few years ago. And I can remember that moment when I had some trepidation. The resistance was still there because, grief, loss, gosh. But I decided I'm going to take the plunge. I believe in this work. I connect so much with that transformative potential of loss, that bardo, to assist people in that space of transformation and wilderness. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to be. And so I bravely went forward. I got my new business cards, grief educator. Very excited, having taken that step. And I go to my first networking event, excited to hand out the card. And I meet the first person, and what do? We're exchanging the cards. And I proudly and excitedly introduce myself as a grief educator. And bless her for the response that came back. She said, "Ooh, why would you want to do that? Wouldn't you rather be a happiness expert?" And her comment sparked me to reflect on that, and I asked myself that. Right? And here's the sweet irony of it for me, and I hope that you see this too, that in a way, the work that I do, I actually am a happiness expert. I don't know that word happiness can be quite loaded, so I don't necessarily use that one. But what I believe the work that we do when we acknowledge our losses and we grieve, it invites us to step into the sweetness of all that's possible in our lives. And so we can shift then from, I want this stuff and not this stuff, to holding it all, to resisting nothing, and wondering what might come out of these experiences. Right? I work with refugees. I work with people who are on the addiction recovery pathway. They all have hurts. They are all in there or have been in their bardos. And the invitation, again, is not to ignore or pretend like the hurts didn't happen, but rather to see what those hurts are inviting of them going forward. And they come and their heads are down, and by the time we've spent some time together, they're standing a little taller. They're loving themselves a little bit more. They might see a new career opportunity that is actually grounded in their hurts. It sparks some new possibility for them. And how lovely is that? That's where I get to hang out. And so that's why I proudly say I'm a grief expert, grief educator. And yes, I work with happiness too, actually. Tears and laughter can exist hand in hand. And I think our best parts of ourself can emerge as we turn towards and work with the full range of what life has on offer. So I'm going to give you one last invitation. Right? So we've started with imagining and recognizing that there are many losses in life. And by the way, I will add, grieving is healthy. There may be some misconception that grief is illness or depression. It's not. It's okay to be sad. Right? It's okay to be angry and to be in wonder in what life is asking of me. So I'm going to leave you with one last set of words from a man by the name of Gerald Sitzer. And Gerald wrote a book. I love the title of this book. The book is called A Grace Disguised: How the Soul Grows Through Loss. How the soul grows through loss. And this is what Gerald has to say about loss. Loss provides an opportunity to take inventory of our lives, to reconsider priorities, and to determine new directions. And so I, being here, am inviting you in your practice to turn towards your losses, to acknowledge them, to work with them. And I'm very curious about what you might find there when you open the door and work with whatever shows up. I wish you namaste and thank you.